and that training is ongoing now. It's once a week for the next 4 weeks. So we have about half of our patrol officers who are trained on the equipment. Again, this is, for the new folks, a big Ford F-550 with a huge cargo body on the back that has all of our less than lethal and emergency response equipment. With the state police in the room, I will say it is the third biggest vehicle in the police inventory in Vermont. They have the first two, the big command post and then the armored vehicle. We have our truck. It's not armored. You can't fight from it. And we didn't purchase any new weapons to put into it. We just put the ones we already had. It really is a crisis response vehicle. And I think it's parked out back right now, right? If anybody wants to mosey on back after the meeting and see it in our parking lot, you're welcome to. Third, we are next week at the Police Executive Research Forum annual meeting in Nashville, unveiling a 10-point platform for police response to the opioid crisis that was written. It was my idea. Some would call it, my harebrained scheme. But I was going to a lot of conferences and work where healthcare professionals were talking a lot about science and evidence-based responses to opioids, saying, we could really use some help from the police, or I wonder what the police are up to. And then a lot of meetings where the police were trying a lot of really creative things, just really putting their best foot forward, but they didn't have a lot of public health professionals in the room. So we had the idea of convening a meeting with, get this, right? Public health professionals and the police, same room. So I know that Laura was there, Corporal Cradaville was there, Kayla Donahue, myself, also Gil Kurlikowski, who was the head of the Office of National Drug Control Policy prior, I think under Obama, prior to Mike Botticelli, who was his successor at the Office of National Drug Control Policy, plus the head of the American Health Initiative at Bloomberg, plus some random chiefs of police like myself. So we came up with a 10-point strategy that we're going to unveil. But I'm proud to say that the Burlington Police Department is already on board with a lot of it, supporting, for example, treatment while incarcerated, carrying naloxone, destigmatizing addiction, being supportive and not trying to obstruct a syringe exchange, which is something we've done. Measuring our progress through measures like ComStat. So not to unveil, and I can circulate the draft. We're just polishing it up for Nashville, but it's something we can be, I think, proud of, because it's something that I know a lot of police departments are interested in signing on to. That was a brainchild that came out of the opioid work here. And one of the things it does, which I think is important, is it recognizes that there's a limit to the burdens we can put on police officers in solving this. People expect cops to solve every problem, and one of the things the strategy says is if we're locking up, for example, people for committing burglaries or robberies for being addicted to opioids, prison's got to do something with them while they're locked up. Otherwise, they're just going to get back out and make life harder on our cops again. So one of the reasons why, and the citizens, right? So one of the reasons why we support, for example, proper screening and treatment in prison is it reduces recidivism. Ultimately, it's safer for citizens and cops. But you'll be seeing some more about that in the next few weeks. Third, I guess, it's also good to have state police here. We talked about changes to the entrance exam for the Vermont State Police Academy. They're in full swing. I don't want to just punt it to you, but we were talking about this yesterday. So if you don't mind, Major Jonas, would you mind recapping a little bit of that?
So we, over a period of time, have felt that we've had questions about the exam and whether it's fair. And that's just sort of putting it simply, I'm not an academic person. However, what we've noticed anecdotally is that people of color and people who English is not their first language tend to fail the exam, even if they have master's degrees or further degrees beyond the typical degree that an applicant would have. When we've inquired about this and we've brought this to the council, the Criminal Justice Training Council, they have looked into this and don't feel that there's enough data over time to really show whether the test is, whether those numbers, because they're so small, can really prove that there's anything improper about the test. But they've been open and willing to hear our concerns. Burlington also had similar concerns and went further and really took a look at the tests and the wording of certain questions. I'll put it my way, is that some of the wordings were sort of unnecessarily complicated. You know, this is a 100-question multiple choice test that has a time limit to it. And there's 5 different sections: reading comprehension, spelling, and several other sections, or 3 other sections. But some of the wording was clunky and difficult, and Burlington made suggestions, very simple suggestions, all of which were accepted by the council, yet the test did not change immediately. We continued to bring concerns, and we asked that in addition to making the changes that Burlington suggested as a first step, would they also consider expanding the amount of time a person is given to take the test? And some people are feeling like the pressure to have to translate from English into their own language and then back into English and so forth. So they agreed to make the word changes and also make the time changes. And for there's been 2 tests, so the April and May test dates all resulted in, at least from our numbers, more people passing
State Police
the test,
Academy.
and more applicants of color passing the test too. So we're optimistic, given this is just a small sample, but we feel that just giving extra time and making the question structure better and more understandable has just, those alone have made a difference. So I think there's still more work to be done so that we can all know that the test is really what we want it to be. That's not my area of expertise, but I am on the council, so we will continue to push for that.
Thanks, Major Jonas. So would it be improper to use, for people that need help with language, to use like an interpreter? That's not, you couldn't do that in an exam, like a person as an interpreter?
How do you, like, at the...
I mean, I don't know, when I think of people taking tests and my history with like using like the ADA to accommodate people when they're taking tests, like sometimes tests are administered orally as opposed to written as an accommodation. So I'm just wondering if there's like, has anything like that been explored?
I would say yes. I think that because of the ADA, there are requirements that the academy would have to be responsive to.
Well, with a person with a disability, I don't think English as a second language is a disability, but it's just along the lines of accommodating someone. I just wonder, and I mean, because it's an exam, it could be kind of weird to have another person there. But as far as the language barriers, just a thought.
Well, my understanding is that the test is intended to be a measure of how someone will do in the academy. So it's really meant to gauge that. Whether or not that's proven, I don't know. But the intention is that if you can pass this exam, then you have a good chance of making it through the academic portion of the academy, which is an extended period of time. So I think that's important to consider as well. Chief, is that...
No, that's right. The entire police academy curriculum is in English, so it is important to have facility in English. I think one of our concerns, and I know I feel comfortable speaking on behalf of Colonel Birmingham, is that doesn't mean you have to be able to read English in this very tightly timed, stressful environment, right? You have opportunities to study, digest the material. So I'm not sure that I would want the test interpreted into a different language, but I would want a person to have adequate time to read English. I mean, that's, and the majority of police interactions as well will be in spoken English, and then also in the court, they'll be doing a lot of court writing. And that's, important. So,
I mean,
but again, not time constrained like the test is.
Having a command of the English language is like a legit requirement for a job, right?
Right. We just want to recognize that not everybody can process the written word as fast as a native speaker, and that's.
And so during the time that they're getting through the academy, that wouldn't be as much of a challenge if there's a way to accommodate that. But in the actual process of taking the exam, it could be trickier to try to do an interpreter.
Yeah, but I think what we're finding is that raising the test to 2 hours has already changed the passing rate considerably. So
Well, that's good to hear.
yeah, that's good.
And there's also no other, my understanding is there's no other timed test during the basic academy. So folks, recruits have as long as they need to take all the written exams along the way throughout the entire time. So.
Well, it's good to hear, though, that some changes are being made.
I'm just working, I have something that's a breaking story that we'll get to in a second. That's why I'm on the phone. Is that cover it, you think? Okay. All right. Thank you. It's great to have. You can come every meeting. You can just, so we're also, as you know, that Chief Sean Burke is imminently leaving to be the chief of South Burlington, which is a gain not only for South Burlington, but I think it's a good thing for the entire community. I think he's a very talented leader, and I think that passing the reins over to a Burlington Police alum, really to our south and our east, is gonna put us in good stead when Trevor decides to retire. So that's in a few weeks. What that means is that the deputy chief search is on. I decided to make it a national search. We have very strong internal candidates, but I think it's a position that is a great responsibility in policing that is pivotal for the city. So I'd like the citizens, the government, the commission to know that when we pick a deputy chief, it's knowing not only what the talent pool is internally, which is a very good talent pool, but also nationwide if anybody wants to cast their lot with Burlington. And so far, I think we've gotten how many applicants in the last week or last few days? It's been
I think about 8.
8 since I think Thursday last. I'm sorry, since last Tuesday. So we'll see how that goes. I'd also would like, of course, commission representation in the process, as well as city hall representation and public representation, union as well. So we'll be in touch about that. Lastly, I'm sure not lastly, but what's breaking right now, because I know we talk about fair and impartial policing every month, is there was an arrest by Homeland Security at the airport of a taxi driver about half an hour ago, maybe 40 minutes ago. From what I understand so far, we have it down in our records as quote unquote an assist. According to Chief Wright, who's looking into it, our cops didn't participate in the arrest. But what I understand so far, and we're inquiring, is that it was an arrest on a judicial warrant. Like it was it is a citizenship-related thing, an immigration-related thing, not a civil matter, not a detainer, but a federal warrant signed by a judge, which is something that, even the harshest critics of immigration policy say that's a legitimate thing to it's got judicial review. It's a judge signing it. So Chief Wright's going to find out more about that. But I'll let you know, we haven't really had any immigration enforcement in the confines of Burlington, except for maybe folks leaving federal court and getting arrested months ago. So I just want to keep you abreast of that as something that's going on, and we'll figure out where we stand. Because the officers know unambiguously not to participate in detaining somebody for civil reasons. In fact, Mike, is Lieutenant Warren in the room? I just saw him. You want to talk for a little bit about the training we're rolling out? Mike designed our fair and impartial policing training.
Sure, so I apologize for not really dressed appropriately for the meeting here.
He did just have surgery. Give yourself some credit.
I'm actually working tonight at our dispatch center, so I wanted to be comfortable for that.
And he had surgery.
Rolling out a fair and impartial training that is going to be starting next week. We're going to be doing a presentation. It's about an hour long. Looks at the policy that we have, really dissects it, talks about some scenarios for officers to really think about how the policy would work into daily work that we do, and we're hoping to get everybody trained within the next couple of weeks. So we'll be short, to the point, but really drive home what it is that we feel is important to the department.
Talk about, just for a second, the scenarios. The scenario base. It's got a question and answer session.
Yeah, so the scenarios, they talk about various situations that the officers would find themselves in, whether a federal agency is in town and they are conducting an operation of their own, and all of a sudden they call for police response. How would we deal with that? How would we deal with a situation where federal law enforcement officers were engaged in a physical altercation with folks, and would we step in, would we not? If we did, then when would we separate from those sort of things? So car stops, how would we deal with car stops, information obtained from passengers on car stops, information obtained from drivers on car stops. So really just trying to give the officers real-world situations that are very likely that we would encounter, or they would encounter on a daily basis, and then have a meaningful conversation about how does our policy dictate what it is that we should be doing and what are the reasons for that, and trying to give them a better understanding so that the officers are handling these things the way that we want them to be.
And I understand that the ICE portion, still leaves room for discretion of individual officers, and I also understand that the whole immigration thing is like a hot topic, but everything that you described sounds like it's just related to that, and I just hope that part of the fair and impartial policing has to do with how officers are interacting with other people of color in Burlington, not just immigrants.
Yeah, the very first slide actually says that at the beginning of the lesson. No, that's true, and the policy talks about it as well. And I think cops get that at a very elemental level, and it's repeated constantly. What is unclear to them is like how we intersect with federal immigration law. I think that's where they need the most training. And it looks like, I'm just on my phone, that it was a federal criminal warrant. And so what that might be, this is like conjecture, but an example, if you're convicted of a crime and serve time and then get deported as a visitor, and then you sneak back in, that becomes a federal crime. So it could be something like that. We'll let you know. But we want to keep everybody abreast. So thanks, Mark.
So I have a quick question. Is there any protocol set up for, inquiries for the OIC when these things come up? I mean, I would think an officer would be pretty quickly aware that he's got a situation here that, implicates this policy, let's say. Is there...
Yeah, the policy actually speaks to that the officer in charge must be notified when these sort of situations arise, and the steps for the officers to do that, when they need to notify, when they don't need to notify, those sort of things.
We're tracking that somehow.
Doesn't happen. I mean, this is
Yeah.
the first one.
Thank you.
So another question for you.
Sure.
What I know about these things is you can have trainings, and then then you're in the field, right, or whatever your experience is. Is there some sort of, or what is your follow-up as far as, okay, now I'm an officer, now I'm in the field, and I wasn't trained on every example. Is there sort of ongoing experiential conversations? What I know about learning is that it's kind of organic. So you have a training, but then it's...
Do you want to talk about what happens at roll call too? Go
Well,
ahead.
yeah, I mean, every shift has a group of officers, 8 to 10 officers that work, and there's a sergeant. They're the field supervisor. So their job is to basically be out in the field and responding to calls and monitoring the radio and really being aware of situations that might be of higher liability, whether it's to the officers, to the department, to the public, whatever the circumstance. And then it's really, we rely on the supervisors to, listen to those things and go to those calls and offer guidance on top of the training that we do at roll call. So, that's a really significant, thing that happens on a daily basis, like clockwork.
Yeah, but don't cops also go through, the supervisors go through incidents at roll call and talk about what happened on the prior shift?
Right, at the beginning of shift, we have a roll call where they pull up on a PowerPoint presentation and talk about the ongoing issues and things like that. This policy speaks a lot to immigration because there's been so much pressure on the administration, Trump administration, around immigration laws and things like that. And being so close to the border, this becomes an issue for us. So certainly it's not as much of an issue as if we were in Swanton or Highgate or somewhere much closer, but we're not far enough away that this isn't something the officers should be aware of, and we should have an idea. There are a lot of federal agencies that work in Burlington. Their offices are in Burlington. But just knowing what I know from having policed here for 20 years, these sort of scenarios don't happen as often as you may think because they deal with them on their own. The federal agencies, do their own thing. It's only when, there's something that happens that they call for assistance that we might go, or we have our own separate interaction with folks that we're dealing with, and these sort of issues may come up. Yeah, there's, I would say the oversight is on the field supervisors and, on the training department and the administration to make sure that the supervisors understand the importance of what it is that we're trying to get, and that we continually check in with them to make sure that the officers are doing what we're hoping to do.
Jan, you said you were talking with Lieutenant, Chief Wright, you said you're talking with Lieutenant Lawson about the airport scenario, and he said that, number one, our cops didn't participate, and it was a federal warrant? Federal criminal warrant, okay. Thanks. Breaking news.
So is there more for the chief's report?
Oh,
or
no,
is that-
thanks, that's,
I don't know if this is a question appropriate to ask it on the report. On the vehicle?
yeah.
So, yeah, so, I mean, among others, I have had a concern just about the vehicle, and I did finally get to see it, thank you. The concern I have had is, as you know, that it escalates our presence to some extent, in that it's a larger vehicle, and just how that would be integrated into the community. I think we all agree that it was a really important vehicle to have, where we store all of our tactical equipment, if I'm correct on that, right? But it's more the daily use than that. I had a concern about whether, I think if I live in this little neighborhood in the South End, if I see this thing rolling through my neighborhood on patrol, I may have a different view than if it's just a cruiser coming through.
Right.
And I didn't know where you were, and I think we talked about developing a protocol for its use.
Right.
And I just wanted to check to see if that's still the plan, and,
Yeah, I mean, I think it, I don't want it rumbling down Caroline Street for, no reason, but it's a Ford F-550, right? It's not a tracked vehicle, and it's not an armored vehicle, and I passed a truck, a Dodge on the way here that's as big as this thing that some guy was driving with dual exhaust. So I'm not minimizing. I know it says
Well,
police
yeah,
on
I mean, the
side.
difference, Chief, in fairness,
Right.
is that he doesn't have Burlington Police,
Right.
stay stenciled across the side of it. So to the extent we're talking about the impact in the community.
Yeah, no, and I think it's a fair question. I think some people may find it reassuring. Some people may like to know that it's out there, and some people may find it alarming. I think one of the things we propose is to see how people react. I mean, we got a mix of reactions. Most of it was positive. I know you have concerns, and I see that. I mean, one of the things I got to say, like, when we put folks out on foot on North Street, I was told you're militarizing North Street. This is a uniform presence that's going to circumscribe civic life. People are going to see these cops in uniform and shrink from the public space, and that was said at this commission meeting, right, by a commissioner. And then I get like nothing but positive feedback from the people of the Old North End, including Sudanese and Somali refugees. So I know that there may be some people that don't feel that way, that are quiet about it, but I would like to see what the reaction is, right? And like I said, we're not going to use it to do traffic enforcement and
And
car
there is,
stops.
and
It's not going to get in pursuits.
And there is a distinction between officers walking down the
Right.
sidewalk, talking to the neighborhood, and driving through the neighborhood in a big vehicle. I mean, there is
Right.
that distinction as well. But again, I'm not overly concerned about this. But I
Yeah.
just want to stay in touch with how it gets deployed, let's put it that way.
Sure.
And its impact.
I mean, it'll be out at for example, on Sunday at the marathon, it'll be at the center of things to be available. So we'll get a sense of the scale and how it feels on the street at an event like that, right? That'll be a good, I know that's a big civic event with a lot of people, but we can get a sense of the scale on the street at that point.
Great.
Yeah,
Thanks.
yeah, no problem. Yeah, thanks.
So our next,
You said ours
we
is
don't.
even bigger than yours, huh?
Well, no, but your MRAP, the armored truck, yeah, that's
Was that
right.
the one that was at the barbecue the other day?
No, that's the Air Force bomb truck. That's different. That's even, yeah, that's.
That was pretty big.
That was
different,
impressive.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah.
It was.
No, but, all right, that's, I know some folks, you had a question, Jackie, but did you want to say something in the public? You came a little late. Did you want to?
Oh, Wafiq.
Yeah, I don't know if you wanted to, you missed the public forum. I don't know.
Do
if
you want to introduce yourself, Wafiq?
My name is Wafiq Faour. I'm a member of the Monarch for Justice in Palestine. If I have a chance to say something to the public, I've been on meetings like this for so long, and until now, I don't see all our effort here is to talk to each other and to come to a conclusion. And instead of the police, there is a detachment from the police department in Burlington and other places, and from the community, and mainly the community of colors, black and brown people. We didn't come to a conclusion to see that the problems happening again and again, how to put it down, how to make it less. We say education, and we are working on education bill on the House at 794, but here on this building, I don't see any changes. If we agree in 2-3 things that we can come together and look at it, and we can stop racism and discriminations against the individuals and persons of colors, it is a problem. And it will start by the police department on the city of Burlington and the surrounding area to say to itself, yes, racism existed, discrimination existed, prejudice inside the department existed. If we don't agree on that, we're not going to solve anything through resolutions or through talking on this forum or others.
Thank you, Wafi.
Thank you.
I agree with you. Thank you.
Jackie, you had your hand up. I don't know. I mean, did the commission mind it, Jackie?
My only response was I understand the concerns about the vehicle, you know, the emergency, is it CRV or ERV?
Oh, ERV.
ERV. People get concerned. There are people in my building. I live in a building that is all the residents are clients of the Howard Center, and people get scared and shocked when they see the ambulances. I live on North Champlain. Ambulances, fire trucks responding for whatever reasons to medical or police emergencies. I guess in my mind, I'm thinking that this is a vehicle that is hopefully going to help to avoid more lethal things happening, more people getting hurt, more terrible outcomes to things. So as a little bit scary it is, I just think that rather see that than the ambulance roll up because something happens and either an officer or the people they're responding to are more seriously hurt in some way. So, yeah. So, I guess I see a balance there. And this one.
No, thank you. I mean, Commissioner Dunn makes the point. It can be imposing, and I do want to see how that plays out. I mean, that's a sincere.
The purpose of people who weren't here, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, is that if we had equipment that's needed at a tactical scene to protect officers, and it was scattered all over, and there wasn't any central place, and the department felt that a vehicle that could store all that equipment and be on a scene, all having it together, was very important to the safety of officers, and we all agree with that completely.
Right.
And so the vehicle came into being. It's really a question of its use and its impact, and there's some education that's going to need to happen in the department, and hopefully a policy so that it all works out fine.
Well, listen, if it's not raining next month, we can all take a tour of the vehicle. We should be able to give you a
I'll
tour
get into it.
next month. Yeah,
Yes.
we've seen it. Yeah, that would be great. Why don't we do that next month, Laura?
Okay, so are we finished with that for now? The next item is the annual goals and assessment review and approval.
So I read through it, and I'm wondering, Chief, what did you think about it? Because these were, I found it encouraging, I found it inspiring, the goals that were set, and what was accomplished in 2017.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it sort of speaks for itself. I think we made a lot of good strides in a lot of different areas. The main part now, I think, is maintaining, in the face of what's a looming amount of attrition, maintaining the size of the department, maintaining our forward momentum with things like equity, also maintaining our forward momentum with things like diversity, which are talking about changes to the test. And I think making sure that we continue to enhance the quality of things that we're doing now, like non-use of less than lethal alternatives, and also foot patrol, and also the opioid crisis. I mean, I think we have, if you look at, I've been here now coming on you know, amazingly, during the summer, to be 3 years, feels like it's gone quickly, but, you know, it's not typical for leaders in general of institutions to come up with like a miracle plan in year 3 or year 4, right? Hopefully, if I was hiding that up my sleeve all along, you'd have the right to ask, like, why the heck didn't I do that in year 1? So we just want to, I think you get a good sense of where my head is at. So you see that this plan embodies the idea of increasing the quality, maintaining the programs and increasing their quality and institutionalizing them.
Is this available to the public?
It is a public document, but that's a great question. I mean, we could easily put it online.
Because I
and-
think
yeah.
it would be great for people to see
That's
what
right.
our goals were and what we've accomplished. It's really, I love the metrics that are involved,
Could have
and there's
Nancy
been some
put
really
this in
good
a
work this
special
year
report.
that I don't think we should keep a secret.
So previously,
Yeah. Go ahead.
previously
Good
under
point.
Chair Kenny, did we have involvement, were we asked by city council
Yeah.
later to weigh in?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So on the same document, was it that, I'm just trying to, was
No,
it
it's
that-
okay. And one of the things Laura brings up is that if you approve this, or whatever version of it you approve, we'll put it online. We'll put it under a special reports. It's sort of a document for review by the commission. So the idea is, right, you make a recommendation to the city council based on the report and your impressions. You can,
So we should probably have that on the agenda for the next time after people have had a chance to look at it or do we need to try to approve it and review it, or review it and approve it tonight?
I thought we were supposed to, I mean, I read through it
Yeah.
before the meeting, so.
I think the intention is that it's approved today before the next.
I was a little disappointed not to see Kaleo mentioned in there, but that's okay. I'm not gonna sweat it. It has been part of community outreach, and Chief Burke was there like at every meeting, and
Yeah.
it was great. And we'll probably do some more. I'm kind of scaling that back a little bit, but
well, if you want to add that
We can have it,
Yeah.
approve it with it.
before, yeah.
that community engagement stuff is, you know, I would like to do more of it if I could figure out a way to get paid for it, but I haven't done that yet, so. But it has been really good. I think it's been really useful, and I think that I'm really encouraged to see as many community members as we have here tonight. But at the Kaleo meetings in the library, we have some pretty good participation, right, Nico, in those meetings? Major Jonas has been there, and so I would like to try to continue with that, but I think it's a significant community outreach piece.
So you would add that under enhanced community?
Yeah, I mean, and we've listed the Burlington Police Department and Vermont State Police as partners in that organization. I think it's, I mean, it's to your credit,
No,
really.
fair enough. That's a good point.
So, did we put something in the annual report that we could just use the same language? Or do you have, if you have language in mind, so we can, you know, add that?
Just somewhere, you know, like Burlington Police Department is you know, a partner of Cleo's and regularly participated, and that's entirely true. Yeah, it doesn't have to be a huge thing, but I think it's important. Especially because that organization was specifically designed to, you know, try to bring police in the community together and have conversations about racial disparities, so. And it's not always easy, you know, Chief Burke can tell you, and you can too, Chief Del Pozo, like, even when we had the conversation when Eric Fowler was here about, like, use of force and stuff, you know, we're having some of those conversations that really we need to have, and like Wafik is saying, it gets frustrating when the conversations just keep going and keep being the same thing, but we do have to start somewhere, and we've been able to do some of that in Cleo.
No, I know. I mean, it's interesting. I'd like to talk to Wafik because we've made substantial progress, not only in training, but in metrics. I mean, you know, we took at face value the analysis. It said this measure is the gold standard of indications of bias, and we said we agree, and then we train to close that gap. I mean, that's a real thing. Doesn't mean we're done. It means we need to improve. But, you know, to reiterate, we brought Obama's implicit bias trainer here to train all of our employees plus the surrounding department's employees. I mean, these are real things. I think that show leadership. We can go on, and it's not to say it's done, right? I mean, we're not done with that, but to say like nothing is, I guess where I'm bristling a little is we need to communicate. The police department needs to communicate this better, because I used social media. I sent it to the news. I brought it up at the commission. Since I came here, I've been told this disparity of outcomes and searches is the researchers' gold standard of bias. And then, not through chicanery, but through training and interventions, we close that gap. I mean, and then I'm alarmed when I know, I mean, to have a man I know and I've spoken with, unfortunately, say like nothing has changed, makes me, upset that I haven't gotten the message out better somehow, or that people have disagreement about what the gold standard is. Like maybe he rejects the researcher standard. There's this other standard, right? So I just want to get, because ultimately we can be performing well, and if it's not reaching the level where people innately feel the trust, then what good is it, right? So, I mean, I take your impressions at face value. I just tell you, things have changed. I'm sorry that I haven't had you believe that. I mean, this police department is the police department that the new imam came to first for guidance and help about where to hold Eid. Then I gave him access to all of our Parks Department resources to figure out the best place. And then when he wanted police coverage, he contacted me directly and said, I know it's not even, I'm having Eid al-Fitr in another city, but can the Burlington police help me get police coverage in that other city? So there's a comfort level that religious leaders have in reaching out to us that I hope you take at face value, and it's a real thing.
When we've
Yeah,
been...
please.
Can I speak?
Fadl.
Shukran. It's not enough. A Muslim religious leader shouldn't come to the police department, okay, to feel comfortable around his community. It's not enough. The Muslim community living on fear on this state. Since 911, before 911, we were part of the bigger community. Nobody brought an attention. Since 911, the mosque on Colchester, they are living in fear. They are not showing up on demonstration on Church Street while their brothers are dying on Gaza just this Saturday. We are scared, they said. They shouldn't come to the police department to be member of the community. They are member of the community. Why they should ask the chief of police to help them on something normal? Because they feel marginalized. They feel the others. They feel they are not Vermonters or American. We shouldn't be like that. We are part of this state. Why we should feel like that? Why our Muslim clergy need help like that? It's absolutely, it shouldn't happen. This is Islamophobia.
And I would 100% agree with everything that you said, 100%. I think the issue is the police have limited, so the police department can't change the attitudes of the community, which I wish we had that power, but we don't. So the fear that is felt, I think what the chief is saying, the police department is here to protect, and it has to deal with the reality of what the culture is right now. But I 100% agree with you. The question is, what can we do as a police department to take steps to make sure the officers are educated, to keep the community safe? That's the power of the police department, and that's the measures that my time on the commission, I've seen a huge amount of effort and energy going into that. The issue that you brought up with feeling unsafe, I'm embarrassed as an American citizen that you feel like that, but that's not within the jurisdiction of the police to change the attitudes and the culture. That's the responsibility of all of us. So thank you for speaking up. And
there is two parts of it. To come to that fear, since 911, the FBI knocked on many doors. FBI and police are in contact. They know each other. That's why our Muslim activist or leader on the mosque, and it's very religious, it's a community. It's just a community, knocked on their door to question them. Because they are second guessing them that they are full citizen American or not. So it is not we are innocent, what we can do is only the media, it's only politics. No, it's part of this pattern of racism and discrimination. And it's existed not only against Muslim community. It's existed from the beginning of this country, and we have to face it as is. This country based and founded on that, and we have to break that through education, through looking at each other's and know each other's as a community and accept each other's. It's not, oh, I help the Muslims, so it means I'm good and everything. No, it's a pattern, and we have to break that pattern. This is what we mean.
And and honestly, I mean, this is the kind of difficult conversation that we have to have. And it's difficult and it's hard to have, but I am actually glad we're having it, and I'm glad you're here, Wafiq. I also think that, you know, whenever we can, and as a matter of fact, we even did it formally when I was the chair of the Attorney General's panel, advisory panel for racial disparities in the criminal and juvenile justice system in Vermont. When we, and I say this to you all the time, Chief, you know, there are certain things that the Burlington Police Department are doing and the Vermont State Police are doing that we hold up as model, as you know, pieces of what's happening, you know, data transparency and stuff like that. Still work to do with that, but I think that it's just important that that communication gap that obviously just like jumped up in the room, it's here, and we need to find ways to continue to have these conversations, even though that they're difficult, but more importantly, along the lines of what Michelle was just saying, the accountability piece. And that's why I invited Major Jonas here, because if we're going to be collecting race data, traffic race data, which, oh, by the way, is mandated by law, and there are 79 police departments that, I mean, there are more than that, but there are 79 police departments that are supposed to be collecting race data. Some of them are not even doing it. Some of them are doing it, and if you went to the Criminal Justice Training Council website and you wanted to look at that data, you really can't. The average person can't look at that data and interpret anything from it. So the missing piece here, in my opinion, at least part of it, is some really concrete accountability. And so that's why I raised the question at the last meeting, is there a way for us to be able to look at race data, and that's only part of the contact police have with people, and use it as a supervision tool? And so I think Major Jonas is prepared to talk a little bit about that tonight. I think it's a little bit farther down on our agenda, and I am getting a little bit concerned. I don't want to keep everybody here like all night, but I am glad that people are here and that you're here, you're saying what you're saying, and we have to go beyond conversations, but in a lot of respects, especially in Vermont and in Burlington, we haven't even necessarily started the conversations, but we absolutely have to do both. And for us, it's frustrating to have the same conversations. I have literally been having the same conversations for decades, you guys, decades. I'm not exaggerating. And I end up having the same conversations with different people about the same thing, right, Wanda? Yeah, Wanda and I worked on Uncommon Alliance like a million years ago. And there is progress. I mean, the fact that race data collection is mandated by law is progress, but if the police departments aren't doing it, what do we have? You know? So anyway.
But you say that the police departments aren't doing it. The city of Burlington Police Department is doing it.
Right, and there are still disparities that are evident.
Right, but that's all as a commission that we have, I mean,
Right.
I mean, the Burlington Police, I commend because they're doing it. So what other police departments are doing, we as a commission don't have any say over, right?
Right.
So.
Well, I mean, except that every police department is part of the community of law enforcement in the state, and I would think that we're going to be willing to be accountable for what we're doing. And the other thing is that Burlington is the biggest city and leads in a lot of ways. So
Totally, and I think we're providing that leadership.
Right.
And I think that, I know as a citizen and a community member of Burlington, I'm proud to be on the commission and proud of what our police department is doing. So I think we do need to do more of it in the state. I think we do to your point, sir, in the back, we have a lot more to do as a community. One of the things that I do think we should vote on this so we can get this done. I think Christine, adding that piece that you suggested is a great idea. I have one question. Under increased accountability, it says the number of civilian complaints generated from contacts outside the police department rises. I do think it's important. I think my understanding is that it's risen because we've made it much easier for people to make complaints.
Yeah, that's an artifact of the prior year's report, where us and the state police are the only two agencies in Vermont where you can just make a report online anonymously. So we did that 2 years ago. When we did, complaints went up a bit, and I asked Chief Wright to check on. We can have statistical. We owe, our plan here as a commission is to have a quarterly report on citizen complaints. I know that the public can come to, and I still would like to do that. But yes, so the idea is that we made, like, domestic violence went up when we created a domestic violence officer
Right.
position. I mean, that was the idea behind it.
Well, I just think we should make this public because it's a lot of good work, but we might want to put something in there that says that complaints have risen
Yeah.
because we've made it so easy for people to complain. We want people to be able to voice their concerns, so we've made it very easy for people. It's not hard to file a complaint.
And is there a spot on the website for commendations too?
You always ask that.
Credit where credit's due, right?
No, yeah.
Okay.
No, it's just,
Are we ready to?
Yeah.
I make a motion that we.
with the two edits
with
at
the two-
least,
with the
yeah.
two edit statistics, approve.
All those in favor? Do we have like a signature page or something that we're supposed to do?
Do you know?
I think it's just in the minutes.
Okay. So the next, we're at 5, we're like not even halfway through. The update on the process involving officer complaints, just talked about that a little bit. What's the update?
Is that a combination of 6 and 9?
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Oh, okay, okay, yeah, yeah.
Did we, and for incoming correspondence, I think it just, you circulated it
Right.
to us, right? You emailed us. So.
Yeah, I just would mention, I did include something that was a little non-traditional in that we have a Facebook page as of a few months ago. And one of the goals is to recognize some of our whole staff, but officers as well, and work they're doing in the community, awards, et cetera, and just who they are and what they do for our community. And the one I included was Corporal DeFranco, who won the life-saving award for saving a woman's life at the high school. And it was just really remarkable, the response, both from the community, but then the woman whose life he saved wrote a letter back to him after she saw it, so just generating a lot of good, positive interaction with the community. So I know it's not the normal, but I thought it was worth noting.
It is, and it's
nice to get.
important,
Yeah,
it's
we love
important.
Thank you.
So then, can we go on to commissioners' updates and comments?
Well, I'd like to go back to, I think, number 6,
Mhm.
update, and we can combine, update the process involving officer complaints.
Mhm.
And before we do that, I just want to give context, because one of the things when I joined the commission, I think it was Shireen that said, we have a city council resolution for citizen oversight, and could you look into it and figure out what we're gonna do? So I met with the head of public safety, actually Peter and I did, what was his name? Dave Hartnett. And the resolution from the city of Burlington says that the commission will report back to the Public Safety Committee of the City Council no later than June 2018 to look at citizen oversight. And when I got the stack of information, we were given, as a commission, a ton of really, really good information on how to do citizen oversight. Best practices, I've read through all of those, and I wasn't I'm assuming that as a commission, there was some discussion around that. I wasn't part of the commission when we talked about that, but out of that really came a process of getting citizen complaints, dividing them among each other, reviewing them. Each of us set up a time with Chief Wright to go in, full transparency. I met with Chief Wright, we all did, and we talked about that last meeting, to ask any questions, any concerns, and I think we all discussed it last meeting, that, yeah, that went really well. we're in a process of figuring out citizen oversight, but that went really well. And let's do it again. Let's get more of the citizen complaints. We'll review them. We'll set up meetings with Chief Wright. And this is kind of an ongoing process to develop for the city of Burlington what feels like a comprehensive citizen oversight. So Christine, I think the 7 days is on because I know I was really surprised when you said that we don't really have citizen oversight in Burlington. And so I feel like if you feel like that, we should talk about it here.
Mm-hmm.
So I was concerned about reading it in 7 days when I was like, darn, doesn't seem to be a problem because you didn't mention anything to the commission that you had an issue with the citizen oversight when we had conversations about it. So I think that's part of why it's, if we're going to have, if this is the place to have the conversation, because this is the place where the work can get done about improving it. And I think we all want to make it robust and improve it, so.
Right. I mean, if you look at the models of citizen oversight in any other city outside of Vermont, what we're doing, I mean, it is progress for us, but it's certainly not like full-blown citizen oversight. I mean, that's just kind of plain and simple. I think what we did and what we're doing is good, and I think it's a pilot, and I think it's a small piece of what really needs to be done or could be done. I mean, in talking to the press is like, I don't know. I probably won't again because it never does any good. And there's no real benefit to it. I mean, and you never know what they're really going to say. And I don't hide the fact that, I would like to see something way more robust in terms of like a citizen review board. So, I mean, I don't know. I'm not really sure how to respond to what you're saying, but before you got here, I've said everything I've always said about how I feel about that, and that I think that we're making some progress, but I think it's really slow progress, and I think that it could be done in a bigger, more meaningful scale. The other thing that I always, and Major Jonas will agree with me or back me up on this, that whenever I'm having conversations about oversight, the other thing that I really think sometimes is missing in that conversation is wellness. Like you know what I mean? Like when we're having that conversation, it's like we forget that police are human beings, and frankly, if a police officer if there's any misconduct or they're abusing their power, I think maybe they're not well. Just a thought. But so, I don't know, I mean, maybe you and I can talk about that more. I don't really care about that article. But anything that I would say to a reporter, I would say to you, I would say here, I would say to anyone, so.
Well,
I have a question if I could, please. Could you please provide us with an example of what you would like to see so we can review it for the next?
Okay, sure.
Well, yeah, I'd like to say, I shared some of the concern that Michelle had when I read it, because we are doing something, and we're presumably doing it in good faith, albeit perhaps a lot less than we could be doing it, depending on, what we want to do. The reality, I think, is that, if I understand it, we were tasked by the city council to kind of try to do something along this line to see how it worked as a pilot project and to respond back in June. And, speaking personally, I think that it's very difficult to do. I mean, citizen oversight is a big subject. If you Google it, there are national associations of oversights. There's oversights that can happen within a department. They're called internal oversights, like what we do here, since we're inside this department. There are external reviews where commissions are set up entirely separate of a department, and they have an investigation staff, and they look into complaints. I mean, there is a range of so-called acceptable oversight. And I don't think we know where we really want to be. I think we ought to spend more time in the next month or so evaluating where we want to be, so that when we report back in June, we can give the city council some recommendations as to where we want to go with this. I think that's what they're going to be looking for. Because I don't disagree with you, although I was a little surprised by your comments. And partly because it appeared like you were speaking for the commission, and I knew we were doing all this stuff. And as chair, I had my head scratched a little bit over, like what Michelle said, because I thought we were doing something. But I don't disagree that, oversight, it's very difficult to do oversight, genuine oversight, when you are part of the management of the department, when there isn't a separation. Right? And we are, at least have been traditionally, and I think still are, part of the management of the department, or overseeing the management. I think the commission's mandate even talks about, management of the department. And most true oversight, if you, in the bigger departments and bigger cities, they create separate boards, independent of the department. They staff them with people, and these complaints are independently investigated. I mean, the department does its own investigation. Well, we rely upon a department investigation, and we're part of that. So I think it's a bigger subject than perhaps even the city council, realized when they tasked us with this. And I think I'm realizing over the course of the year that we've been doing this, that it is a bigger issue than I was fully aware of. And that we ought to spend some time. I gave Laura an article. There's a number of articles. I asked her to send something around which creates at least some thought about options. And that next month we come back with, what do we think and what do we want to recommend to the city council when we make our report.
That's in the works then? That's going to be sent?
Yeah, I gave it to her. Asked her to
Well,
send it.
and I
better,
think
as far as
that
I'm
it's up for
concerned.
debate. I mean, we're not really involved in the management. I mean, there was a time when the chief reported to the commission, but now chief reports to the mayor. So our job has really shifted in the city of Burlington, when it was more of a commission form of government. I mean, I think the whole city of Burlington government shifted from commission form of government to more town manager, with the mayor having folks report into the mayor. So my question is, if we're not doing citizen oversight, what are we doing? Because we're really not, I don't know if anyone else has an opinion, we're not really involved in the management of the police department. The mayor, Chief Del Pozo, reports to Mayor Weinberg.
I mean, we adopt all of the procedures in this department. I mean, right, don't we? I mean, by mandate. So, I mean, if we don't like the way something's operating, we have the power to request, and that, one of the reasons I tried to talk about this vehicle is to have a policy. And I think we can ask for that, and we can review it, and we can adopt it. It's some way of trying to keep kind of the management of the department in line. And, I think historically, at least in my 30 years of dealing with commissions, I think they're all viewed as, even though I agree the department head appointment got moved back in the 90s or late 90s from the commissions to the mayor, they still very much get absorbed in the management of the department, how it runs, where the emphasis is going to be, gives direction. It's not an independent body sitting down the road with its own office, and that's in big cities. And as I said, there are different models, and you can have models of, as I read it at least, models of inside oversight as well. So we're part of the organization, at the same time creating an effective, oversight arrangement. Whether we have that now or not, that's, I guess, a matter of opinion. Whether this does it, is this it? And the one thing that I do read in this is that if you give the impression to the community that you are doing true oversight and you're not, well, then you're creating something that's not accurate, and people have the wrong impression about what you're doing. So I think we just need to be clear, I think, as to what level of oversight are we going to do in this little town. Big towns, big cities, they spend more money and create more separation. And I'm not sure what's
They
the
have
best
dedicated
model.
resources
What's
and
the best
staff
model?
to do it too.
Yeah, what's the
Right.
best model here in this
Right.
community to
Right.
do effective citizen oversight?
Right.
And we were given this, told to kind of do this, and we've been doing it, but I'm not sure that's the most effective model, and I'm not sure that it's creating necessarily independent oversight that others may think we're doing. I don't know. And I think that is a conversation that we should have with the city with ourselves, and then with the city council when we report back.
And one of the things that I'm doing as chair is, I have been in touch with Professor Seguino and Major Jonas and asked her to come here tonight to talk about that, to talk about this very specific topic of using race data traffic information in supervision. I mean, that's a little piece of kind of like oversight. And the other thing, I'm not going to say anything more about the reporter, but anybody who's talked to a reporter, I mean, I talked to him for probably an hour, and he picks and chooses what he's going to say. And I don't ever speak publicly about this police department or the Vermont State Police or anybody without saying thank you for your service or trying to give some credit where credit is due. So I'm certainly not like trying to be in a adversarial relationship. And what else can you say about the newspaper and reporters? Like, they're trying to sell papers or whatever they're trying to sell. But anyway, I think that it's an important conversation for us to continue to have, and I also think that there's a certain amount of leadership that has to come from a state level. and I'm looking at you, but I'm not saying like just from the Vermont State Police, but even from the legislature about what kind of progress we're thinking we need, even as a whole state, in terms of oversight or what oversight really looks like. And even though, you know, you get a lot of credit, and I agree with it, for doing a lot of model stuff that is really probably way out in front of what's going on in the rest of the state. And I think that's important. I think that deserves attention. I also think that the numbers staying the same with racial disparities and our jails looking the way that they do, the police department by itself is not responsible for that totally, but has a piece of that. And until we have concrete information that we can look at and say it's getting better or it's getting worse or it's staying the same, we're going to keep having these like basically useless conversations about how bad it really is or who's really doing it or whatever. Like, look at Wanda shaking her head. We've been having these conversations for like 20 years, really. So sorry if I'm a little frustrated, but I am. The disparities are there. There are racial disparities, you know, and like helping people with like the training from like Dr. Marks, like bless his heart, he's a great presenter. But within all of that information is like, okay, bias exists. Everybody knows that. Like my 8-year-old grandchild knows that. Each person, each officer, or even in my job, especially if I'm a public servant, I have a responsibility to somehow or another not let that internal bias affect the work that I do. And until we can actually measure that, we're not doing anything. So that's why I asked Major Jonas to be here, because I think that the Vermont State Police have at least started trying to use that model of supervision where officers can look at their data and maybe with a supervisor and say, you know, your numbers look a little weird, like what's going on here?
I'm sorry. But before we leave, if that, excuse me, somewhat of a different issue, on the oversight issue, if I may, for just, because since you're here and I know you were involved in internal affairs for a long time, and you're familiar, I'm sure, with SPAC, you know, for those of you that aren't here, there's a state organization, or state, there's a committee, I guess it is, that oversee, or when you discipline, just correct me if I'm wrong, when there's going to be discipline before it's decided at the department and then it's taken to this committee and it's presented and there's a discussion as to whether it's appropriate or not. Is that
correct?
Is
So
that
the State Police Advisory Commission is also known as SPAC,
Yeah.
and they provide, they advise the commissioner in imposing discipline as a result of internal affairs investigation.
right? So one of the so one of the things that we were modeled at, or this is the ordinance that, or the resolution that gave us this responsibility. It said, you know, recommended the city clarify civilian oversight by using a model based on Vermont State Police Council SPAC. All right. So we were, if you will, you know, tasked with that approach. And one of the things that I just want to be clear about is that it's my understanding SPAC. I mean, that's all SPAC does. When there's a discipline, they come together. Department comes, presents the facts and what they propose to do, and they either get it okay or not. Not that they're bound by it, right? But they're not there passing policy and running the department anyway, are they?
No, they're not. So it's actually state statute that this commission exists, and the certain number of members have to be on it. They serve for a certain period of time. There has to be one attorney, one retired trooper, and they get together every other month with the commissioner and the director of internal affairs, and the director presents all of her cases to the commission and the.
Are these civilian complaints as well as internals, or just internals, or both?
They are cases that rise to the level of internal investigation, which is determined by the commissioner, but then also what we call miscellaneous complaints that are handled at a station level, so they don't rise to the level of improper conduct, but they are still to be addressed. So she presents each of those, and the commission discusses those cases and asks questions and talks to the commissioner about what he intends to do, and he looks to them for guidance and so forth. But yes, he has the ultimate say.
And those are not open to the public?
They are not.
Because I feel like we have, I mean, if there is a case, fortunately, we don't have a ton of bad conduct, but I feel like we have gone into executive session around, you've asked us for advice
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I think is at odds with the 7 Days article is that every single internal investigation has been brought to the attention of the commission unsparingly. I mean, we don't give the investigative file, but I assure you, I'm not withholding any probative evidence at all. I mean, I'm staking my reputation on that here. From perjury allegations that have made the news to background investigations gone awry that we had to follow up on that are still, confidential, to domestic incidents, to, folks we've terminated down at the police academy. You've heard all of these things.
Yeah.
There's not a single investigation of misconduct or corruption of any seriousness that you've been unaware of. I mean, that's and I've relied on your sensibilities to go back to my cops and say the commission is pretty upset about this. You talk to, the average citizens who serve on our commission, and they think this is a serious deal, and it matches my intuitions, or I'm at odds with that. And, sometimes I have to come back to you and say, listen, I've talked to our city council, not council like the attorney, and I'm not going to be able to take as strict action as I hope to. But I've been upfront about that too, right? So, I mean, there's nothing so the irony, though, I think, is for the citizen complaints, you each see a slice, because if you see them all, then you can't be part of the appeal process. But the internals, everybody sees all of them. So,
So if I were to categorize our oversight right now, the internal investigations, we get an executive session, because that's not public. We're well aware. I've been on the commission as long, but I've heard you bring some up. And then the citizen complaints, we see really 100% of them, because we divided them up and got to spend time with Chief Wright and said, I mean, I had mine with you. I don't know how everybody else experienced it, but you were very transparent on all of the complaints. Here's what happened, here's what we did, here's, I'm not sure. So that's where I look to maybe what else could we be doing? That's the, what would make that better?
Well, I mean, my particular concern really, obviously there's a lot of different things in police work that, could be subject to oversight. But I think what my concern has been as a person of color and somebody who's been involved in this is specifically the racial disparities. And, back to the same problem that Burlington Police Department certainly isn't responsible for the whole state or changing everybody else's attitude, but they are responsible for their own data and our outcomes. And so I think that one thing that I have an idea about that we can do more of is like what we're talking about, and the reason that I asked Major Jonas to be here is about holding people accountable, because racial disparities that are reflected in this department's data or that are reflected in any part of the judicial system in the whole state or by our jails, somebody's responsible for that. And while Burlington's only responsible for Burlington, it's a concern of mine that I think needs more attention and a different type of attention that really focuses on accountability. And I don't see anybody really doing that to the level that I believe that we need to or that we could.
So I thought, Chief, that you had raised in the past, and so if I'm not addressing what you're saying, let me know. I thought what we had discussed in the past months, officers or staff here getting the data on their stops data, et cetera, and that it's very clear who has what and where people stand with their data in terms of.
Yeah, so it turns out, we released one data set a little over a year ago, and I think, not to jump the gun, but I know you also did this once as well, right, in that time period. So the frequency with which we tell cops where they stand, or troopers where they stand, is once, and it's the same with the state police and Burlington police. I think one of the differences is, and it's a difference in leadership philosophies, please, if I'm wrong or you want to add something, by all means, Major, go ahead. But you sat down with officers and pointed out where they stood. Whereas I said, and you didn't give them their peers. You just said, this is your disparity. Was my tack was, here's a code. You can look at yourself and you can look at all your peers. Because I don't understand what I would tell them beyond, like the data that you're pointing out and telling them yourself is the data that I'm showing them, plus I'm giving them their peers. You're doing it personally, and I'm letting transparency hopefully do some work. So one of the things, you know when our conference call with Stanford is? We have the computational lab? Okay. Tomorrow? So, I worry that, like, 2/3 of the things that we do stick, but I hired a guy at the NYPD who went off to Stanford to be a data analyst, and what he wants to do is build a dashboard that'll give cops, supervisors, and management, like, insight into the breakdown of car stop race data, not quarterly or annually, but as it's refreshed, so as records puts it in, it'll automatically. So cops, anytime they want to pop in and see how they're doing, they can. Supervisors can get a view of their subordinates and focus attention as they need be, and then we'll, at the executive level, get an ongoing view down, generally, like the global view, and also the officer level. Something that they want to build for us as a tool to show that it can be done and to show the value of transparency. It has just begun. Like, that's
And I
brand
think that's a
new.
very good example of like institutionalizing a tool, because what a lot of what has happened with the commission and with Chief Del Pozo has a lot to do with who Chief Del Pozo is, which is to your credit, and that's a good thing. But if he should happen to go, we get somebody else that, isn't him, which will happen, unless you're going to stay here for the rest of your life. We need to have institutional tools that are going to keep that stuff in place. So I feel like we're kind of jumping into number 9 here. And did you want to kind of open up the conversation or say something about what the Vermont State Police are doing? Is that okay?
We're having that meeting on Friday, that conference call, by the way, so.
Can we do that?
Yeah, I'm happy to, so I brought some different.
Well, it's kind of like, it's kind of like 9 and 10, right? Okay. Yeah.
So I can approach this different ways. I can talk about what we did, which you specifically asked about, and what we started talking about, or I can kind of go back to our department's sort of history of realizing the work that we needed to do, which goes a little bit, or ways further back. Or I can just stay on task with talking about how we are addressing racial disparities in our traffic stop data. That's probably more practical.
Yeah, I am most interested in that, but I think, and especially since we have so many people here from the community, whatever you can say, or if people are interested in learning more about the work of the Fair and Impartial Policing Committee, that's important. And that's also a meeting that's open to the public down in South Burlington. It's usually at the law school, right? So, however you want to do that, I'm hoping we can get out at 8 tonight. And we do have a couple of other things, but I really appreciate your being here. Thank you for your service, and, however we can do this.
Yeah, and I just want to say I feel a little bit uncomfortable because I feel like we're still working to get this right, and so I don't think that it's fair to say that we're, holding everyone accountable and that other departments aren't. I think we're all engaged in this work and trying to learn as we go and listen to the people we serve, and also tackle issues of fairness and ethical policing at every level. So the way that we've looked at this is that it's really not just looking at data or any one thread. We've really decided to approach this at every level. So we look at recruiting a more diverse applicant to the state police. How can we do that in a time when recruiting police troopers or police to any agency is a real struggle nationwide? We look at our policies and procedures through the lens of what are we missing? What are we missing here? How do we make sure that our institutional practices are fair? How do we have a more inclusive membership or a group of troopers? And then community engagement and community outreach. This is something that for state police is a little bit of a challenge because of the broad range of just coverage that we have. We patrol in the most rural parts of Vermont, and we have very few troopers on duty for a shift. So we'll typically have like 4 troopers working the night shift, covering hundreds of miles. And so our efforts around, talking to people and building trust, we have to work harder to do that than we have historically. And so and then training. So training around things like, unconscious bias, but beyond that, just, there's a range of really good trainings that are available to help raise awareness about the fact that as human beings, we have biases and associations that we can't act upon when we're in but when we're in a public service role, we don't have options. We have to be aware of our biases and how they could play into our decision making. So we instill that type of training at, we express the importance of that when we're recruiting and when we're interviewing applicants, but we also have training at pre-basic, which is this early phase of training. Recruits get that training at the basic level, and then in our post-basic academy, we also have an 8-hour block of instruction. So we're sort of tackling things like, unconscious bias and inclusivity at all different levels in our department, and getting people having discussions at the barracks level that they really typically haven't had before. We are majority, obviously white, majority male agency, and we're working to broaden and widen who we attract to our agency, and it's kind of an uphill battle. So in 2016, we released 5 years of traffic stop data, and as everyone knows, sort of the rest is history. We had commissioned Dr. Jack McDevitt from I always say Northwestern, Northeastern, I'm getting confused, who does this type of work, and he released, he worked with our senior command, we released the data, and then after that, we also had the benefit of Stephanie Seguino taking the same raw data and analyzing it. I think I won't go into too much detail, but we learned a lot about disparities in our search rates and our ticketing rates, and those were disparities by race. We didn't look so much into gender, even though that was one piece of data we had been collecting. We were most concerned about our search disparities and continue to work on those. We did have data that showed, and I'm not gonna have the exact numbers, but let's say 40 to 50 troopers whose racial disparities in their car stops were considerably above what one might expect to be the driving population in our patrol areas. And so we made a decision as senior staff that I would sit down with each of these members and just have a conversation. We didn't, it was not a disciplinary conversation. There was some talk about, should we have a union rep with us when we meet with, Ingrid about this, and that was not how we handled it. It was just a conversation with the trooper's supervisor. Now, there were 5 years of data, and there were a number of members who had different assignments by the time that we had this data analyzed, right? So you could be talking to a trooper who worked the road for 2 years and was now a detective. We have over 300 troopers who work all around the state, so it's sort of a little bit disjointed, right? There's 5 years of data, and we're going after the fact in the year that came after this analysis. So, but we did sit down and have conversations, and we did so after we had done a statewide training to better understand what we were trying to achieve by collecting the traffic stop data, because that was another thing that we learned after the fact, was that we didn't send the message out in a comprehensive enough way when we started to collect traffic stop data. We didn't explain to the membership what was the point of this. We just figured, well, we're gonna do the right thing. We're gonna take the advice of our Fair and Impartial Policing Committee and the other advisors who want us to do this. We're not afraid of doing this. And we just checked a bunch of boxes for a bunch of years. And the quality of our data was very poor. And we have spent the last couple of years improving the quality and doing a really good job. So at least we know that the quality of our data has gone up since that time. So those initial meetings with the individual members whose racial disparities were particularly high, it was basically a conversation. Like, so, you know, I'm sitting down with a trooper and saying, you know, where have you worked in the past 5 years? Which barracks? And they'll explain what their assignments have been. Well, you know, your traffic stops of Hispanic operators, or those who you perceive to be Hispanic operators, is 3 times what we understand to be the Hispanic population in this general area that you patrol. Let's just talk about that. And the conversations were a wide array of, you know, everything from, well, I grew up in an area that had many more Hispanic citizens in it. I feel like I'm, you know, probably maybe over-marking my, you know, Hispanic as an option for perceived race. I think I have a keener sense of people, when I perceive people as Hispanic, you know, a variety of conversations that were useful. There were some people who shut down and who were very afraid that this meant something bad was going to happen, or that they were thought of as being unethical or improper in their practices. I can tell you that no discipline arose out of any of the meetings or any of the data. There was an article about that came out, speaking of articles kind of misrepresenting the facts. The article said something like, you know, state police speaks to troopers with racial disparities and finds that there are no biases. And that was not what I said. What I said was that, you know, this is something that we're all learning about as we go, and that no discipline arose from any of these meetings. So what we're working toward is having, at the station level, so at the barracks level, having supervisors be able to look at their own troopers' data and work with it at the station level, instead of somebody from headquarters coming around and having meetings with the individual troopers. And again, this was just for car stops. This was not, we weren't looking at searches in detail, but we've done a bunch of work around searches. We've done a lot of other work. This was just one piece of what we were doing. And we haven't decided for our 2017 data yet if we're going to have the same format, or if we're going to do it differently, if we're going to sit down with the individual troopers and look at their racial disparities. Ideally, we would like supervisors to be much more agile in taking a look at their own barracks data and deciding, does something seem amiss here? And then we have our community advisory group, which is the Fair and Impartial Policing Committee that Christine mentioned, and this committee advises us on all things to do with, you know, fair and ethical policing. So we have folks with, you know, who help us with recruiting and training, folks who help us with community outreach efforts, and data quality. So Stephanie's on our committee. She hasn't been able to be there very often, but she has helped us to improve the quality of our data. So this kind of holds us accountable. We report out to our Fair and Impartial Policing Committee, and they, you know, look at us at every level and help us with our mission. But with regard to these sort of accountability of individual troopers, that was something that we did as a result of the 5 years of data. I think they were productive meetings, and we'll see what we're going to do with the same data for 2017.
I mean, would you plan to continue using it as like an individual tool in supervision, or? I mean, because I guess when I hear you say that they were just conversations, I feel like I wish, I mean, and I understand that officers get uncomfortable about it. A long time ago when we were doing the Uncommon Alliance stuff, which was the beginning of race data collection in policing just in this area, a couple of the chiefs, including Chief Whipple and probably Chief Sherling, candidly said to us, I'm really afraid that my officers are just going to not stop people because they're so afraid of being labeled racist.
So we've had
We get that fear, but that
40% reduction in car stops since we've started doing this. That's happened. I mean, I'm relieved that accidents have not gone up. They haven't, which I have really candid conversations with officers about. If the goal of traffic enforcement is to promote traffic safety and we have 40% fewer stops but the same level of accidents, we should consider at what level this intervention has diminishing returns. It's a fair question. Some of that too is rookie cops who love to stop cars because they're new and have a lot of energy. A lot of them are on foot, but that doesn't explain all the variance. So I just wanted to interject that Chief Sherling wasn't entirely wrong. Like, cops are holding some of that enforcement at arm's length because they're worried about the scrutiny. And the other thing that is a very difficult conversation to have is what denominator to use. I mean, the denominator we use by default is the either the census or the estimated driving population. But then we also at the very same time recognize that that poverty and bias have outsized effects on communities of color. And I guess, I'll give a specific example. I've been saying for about a year and a half now that almost all of the variance in whether you get a warning or a ticket by race is whether your license is suspended or not. And I'm not the DMV, I'm not the court system, I don't suspend licenses, and I don't restore them, and I recognize that a police department can start a person down the road to suspension, and then for whatever reason their license gets suspended, and now we're just heaping it on. But I mean, I'm saying to the folks at home, to the folks in the audience, if you want to address the disparity between a warning or a ticket, we have to address why drivers of color are 2.5 times more likely to have a suspended license. Like, we've done good faith research. We've shown that this is the cause. We've shown it explains the variance. There it is. Let's focus on that, right? If they were the hypothesis now is that if drivers across race were driving with the same license status percentage-wise, they'd get the same outcome for warnings or tickets, right? We can act on that. But I can't. I mean, I can't do that. I can't do that alone. I'm not. I need the DMV and I need Kaleo and TJ Donovan to work on that, right? I mean, that's. So I'm just saying that there's a way forward. Like, you've been saying this for 30 years. I've only been saying for 18 months. Like, warning versus ticket, it's suspended licenses. That's what explains it. Let's get to the bottom of that, right? So we can do that.
I mean, I do think it might be a little more complex than that. And I also wonder if with the increase of foot patrol, is that part of the explanation why the number of traffic stops has gone down?
It's some of it, but no, it's not all 40%.
And we're not just looking at that as an indicator, like the number of traffic stops. We really want to know more about like the content and stuff. I mean, there's kind of an expanded view of all of that.
Yeah, but I mean, again, I know you said that the license thing, everything's more complicated than it's made out to be. But what I'm saying is if you are a black motorist or a white motorist with a valid driver's license in Burlington, your chance of getting a warning or a ticket is the same.
And one of the things that we started to look at with the Attorney General's panel is when we started looking at the population in jails, getting the information directly from the Department of Corrections, and again, recognizing that the police department might be the front end, but not completely responsible for what happens in the whole criminal justice system. But we started breaking those things down, like who's in jail because of this, who's in jail because of that. So, I mean, it's a huge thing to look at. But at the bottom line is that our jails look the way they do, and to people of color, witnessing that and knowing that for 20 and 30 years,
you know, we have to do something. Like, something has to change. And obviously, you know, everybody knows, this is the kind of conversation that's going on across the country. So it's not just Burlington, it's not just the state of Vermont. But I just feel like we get this far, like, you know, what you're describing in these conversations with individual officers, and either they're too afraid to have the conversation, or the conversation is like, I don't know why it happened. Like, to people of color that have been impacted by this, that's not acceptable. It's just not. And I also don't think that there's a whole lot of value. I mean, I think it's important that everybody's trying. Data collection, again, is mandated by law. I think that a lot of times these conversations never even include the use of force data. I mean, are you collecting use of force data? I mean, and is that like available to the public as well?
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, and I think that's important. I mean, I think that, you know, Vermont State Police and Burlington Police Department are like probably light years ahead of a lot of the other departments in the state. And whether that's because they're smaller departments and they don't have the resources, whatever, the end result is still that our jails are being populated by black and brown people. And it's a problem. And I'm not just saying it to police departments, I'm saying it to TJ and everybody else who wants to hear it. And I don't have all the magic solutions, but I do know that it's a problem that's existed for a long time in this state, and we are doing horribly, and it's not just you guys, but in this state and all over the country. I mean, you know, I don't have all the answers, but I do know that there's a problem that as a state and possibly as a city, we're not doing as much as we can, or it doesn't seem like a very urgent problem to solve to me. Because I've heard people explain, and as a matter of fact, I don't want to say anything despairingly about Chief Burke, but Katrina, please help me out. At the last Kaleo meeting, we were talking about numbers, and Chief Burke said, I looked at my own numbers and they looked really bad, and I thought to myself, oh my God, what's going on? And his explanation was, it's because I'm in the old North End. Do you want to say anything about that, Katrina? Like, what that was like for us to receive that? Yeah. I respect him and I work with him and I thank him for being there, but when he said that, I was like, wait a second. The first question in our minds is, okay, well, why are you there?
Yeah, so my name is, I'm not sure, I've never been to this specific commission, so I don't know what the protocol is, but my name is Katrina Battle, and I am a member of Black Lives Matter of Greater Burlington, as well as the founder of the Milton Inclusion and Diversity Initiative, and a member of the Vermont Coalition for Ethnic and Social Equity in Schools. So clearly I am very involved in racial and ethnic disparities across the state of Vermont. And that was extremely alarming. And not even to single out that one person who said that in that meeting, because I'm just validating what she said is what was said in that meeting as the reason. It's because I like being in that area of town. I'm always there, and that's why my numbers are so high. I think there's something that I've seen even throughout this meeting and the dynamic of the way things have played out that is consistent with that and is very concerning. And it's almost a sense of like wanting some kind of like credit, like really wanting like a feather in the cap. And I recognize that work is being done, but this is not a theory matter. This is a life and death matter because trauma is happening, human lives are being impacted. And so if everybody else is getting an F and we're getting a C, right, it can feel like, yeah, like, but we've come so far. Yeah, but we don't deserve a feather in our cap, yeah, because we're still not there. We're still so far away from where we should be and where we owe our marginalized populations to be. And so that was extremely concerning. And, you know, hearing, you know, Christine repeatedly, like, and Wafiq, you know, their perspectives and what they're sharing in this room is the same thing that I've heard from parents of students of color across the state, of children, young people, high schoolers, middle schoolers across the state and in the greater Burlington area. And so that's consistent. And multiple times I've heard in this meeting just lots of defense. And that's a relatively natural reaction that I've seen in many areas, whether I'm doing some of this work in schools or on panels or in legislative spaces, that defensiveness is pretty common, especially among white people when dealing with racism, because as has been mentioned, it's like nobody wants to be called racist, nobody wants to be perceived as racist or having these ethical issues, but we have that. And so that's a part of working through white fragility and like some of that concern, like that's a part of the work of creating an equitable community and environment for all members of our community. So that does mean that like we have to work through that. Something that I would just really like to say, just from my, this is my first meeting here, first time coming to one of these meetings, from what I've observed is I really hope that members of the commission are doing the anti-racism work in their own knowledge and their own education, because self-education is the key to all of this. I mean, I've heard, you know, I think Chief Del Pozo has mentioned, you know, books like Policing the Black Man and Chokehold and Rise, and how those were really helpful, and like framing like, oh my goodness, I didn't even see what I didn't see, right? And how important that is. But as commissioners who might not have direct oversight, but have a lot of information and whose opinions are weighed heavily by the chief of police here, like it's really important to have a really good understanding of what it means to be white and how that even comes into play in these commission meetings. So I do have a book recommendation called What Does It Mean to Be White? Developing White Racial Literacy. And it's by a woman named Robin DiAngelo. Because there's been some really concerning dynamics even in this meeting. And like when we talk about our marginalized populations that we're very concerned about, we have to put them at the forefront and keep them there.
Right. And here's a good thing, you know, this is in terms of doing the work and moving forward. You know, Chief Burke he'll be the South Burlington Police Chief, and, you know, you and I can go to him, and who else was there? James Ellers or whatever, just trying to be governor or something?
Yes.
We did really appreciate the fact that he said that, and it wasn't easy for him to say that, and so we recognize that. But you and I, and maybe even you, Wafik, we can go out and have a conversation with him and just follow up with what he said, because he doesn't see anything wrong with what he said. So
I would like to say that, like, while I 100% agree with that, there has to be a certain level of like intentional, like a very large level of intentional self-education, because it is not the work of Black people or people of color to make the white people around them not racist and do all of their education for them.
Right.
So like that self-education is continuing and not just, it can't stop with one book, even if it's a really, really good book, and you read it every month. Like racism, like the growth of racism and the way that it's changed its face over the course of our history, like it is outpacing a lot of the race collection and data and hard work that officers and departments are doing. And so we have to be on the forefront of that education, like increasing that education and that ownership of that, and never passing the buck, like just owning it. That yes, it is a problem. We might be doing better than everybody that we can see around us, but we're still failing members of our community.
So Katrina, I mean, Robin DiAngelo wrote White Fragility. That's a paper that we issue to our recruits. I've read it, Sean read it, I've discussed it. I was talking to a Black psychology professor today in this city about that paper. And I understand what you mean about the defensiveness. There's this natural reaction for folks to seem defensive. When I say these things, I think, if you ask me what I get my hackles up about, it's that I feel like we do devote a lot of energy to this issue in good faith, and I feel a reluctance. There's been a long-standing reluctance on the department, on the part of police departments, to admit that that what they do has these impacts that you discuss, and there's a lack of self-awareness. I'm out there calling it as I see it, making arrests as I see it, you know, taking people into, you know, every time I see a guy, this is not here, I'm thinking of my other job, but every time I see a guy smoking a joint in the street, I make an arrest, and I'm colorblind to that, without even thinking like that there's, you know, in the suburbs white people smoking a joint by the pool will never come under the gaze of the police, and the kids smoking it on the stoop in the city are often seen and arrested. And not, for example, like an obvious case, not having that level of awareness. So I get that, and I think that one of the things we encourage police officers to do is to come to terms that, like, these are difficult conversations, right? They involve, one of the things I show to my coworkers is police officers holding attack dogs at bay, letting them nip at black protesters in the South. Like, this was the police that did this, right? We can't say, that's different, that wasn't me, that should not, you have no right as a person of color to have that exist in your consciousness when you deal with me because I wasn't alive when that happened. I don't buy that, right? But when I do get frustrated, it's like we accept certain things as goals. We have a common knowledge of what the standards are. We ascribe to the standards, whether it's I demand that, I'm saying to me, but I want implicit bias training for your department. I say that the most important and impactful outcome is search results, and then we hew to them, and in a real, not by, I'm standing by the integrity of my numbers, like we hew to them and we reduce the disparities, and I get the feeling all along, that's not what I meant, it's still a problem, you don't get credit for that. And like, today I had members of the AALV come to me and say, we're so grateful to have police in the Old North End, you guys are the best, and I don't know how the refugees could do it without you. Now, your narrative and that narrative can exist simultaneously. But what I don't want is for me to shout that across the room at you every time, and then you shout the other true things back across the room at me every time, when there's no need for the epistemological conflict. You could acknowledge like that there are refugees that say, I'm so glad that the Burlington police are there for me as a new black American, and they've made my ability to report domestic violence better, and when I worry about people being racist during Eid and hurling epithets, the police come out and protect Eid. Like, that's real, but then, and I'm here to say, and there's all this other stuff that we still have to address that we're still failing at, right? So I guess if I'm still exhibiting symptoms of white fragility, if we reconcile that, and I'm still exhibiting symptoms of white fragility, then you've got me. But I'm saying there's still a tension here that I feel we need to resolve to be constructive, and that's that, like, we just hurl like counter narratives at each other when both of them could be true.
In part,
you said like there's still that tension. Yeah, because it's just something that's kind of existed. I mean, it's always going to be there. It's always going to be something. And I think that the best that we can do is we need to work through it and bring in fresh insight. And I'm so glad that your young mind and everything you said, I've heard it before, but you just said it so articulately. And thank you. But thank you also for acknowledging there's that tension. And I mean, we've become accustomed to existing in these parallels, and for some it is more painful. And I think about, the race data collection, and I was writing down before my experience, and I concluded the last time I was engaged, it's about a reflective solution. A reflective solution means having police commissions that are reflective. You've got the women, you've got the people of color. I think your workforce and recruitment and making those efforts that you were speaking about, but out in rural Vermont, that's more difficult, or your management or your supervisors. And those actions or those inputs alone, create transparency. But other than that, there's always gonna be that tension. And I would recommend that you pace yourselves and don't get stressed out. And I'm just and when we talk about the race data collection, there's one thing I am noticing is that I was listening carefully about, it's a trend, it's happening nationally, it's happening, but what is a tangible outcome that we can live with? Because I mean, every community has everybody coming in at different places, this and that, and we got different reports. I got a pile over here, I've got a pile over here, and they come in, but that discomfort, we're gonna have to live with that whether we like it or not. But I think our charge is to continue to have those dialogues so we can feel safe having those dialogues and be mindful, and if anything, become practiced at the tension that is gonna be there, Yeah, I mean, I'm here tonight, but it's not, I didn't come here to feel tension, but it's like putting on an old pair of shoes. It's there, I can still walk, I have my balance and stuff. But
thank you, Wanda.
And I would like to just to respond, like when I'm like this space isn't really set up for it not to be a
Yeah, no, that's
lance
fair.
back and forth, right?
Yeah.
So when I'm saying these things, like Christine gave me the floor, so I'm sharing because I have the space, right?
Yes.
Like this isn't set up necessarily to be a dialogue, so I could see how it would feel. Like, I mean, nobody's saying that the Burlington PD or the Vermont State Police is doing absolutely nothing right. I think we've listed many things that are improving and are being done well. What we're saying is that, like, we can't be satiated with that, and we have to make sure that we keep the pressure on moving forward. I hear it said often that big wheels turn real slow. Well, it's not just the size of the wheel that matters. We also have to make sure we have consistent pressure and many hands pushing. And so, you know, I think I 100% with what Wanda said. You know, we have to learn to be like embrace this uncomfortable tension space and just continue speaking back towards each other. I don't hold any animosity towards you, Officer, you know, Chief Dopozo.
For the record.
For the record, I don't at all. And you know, it's disappointing if that's the perception that you're getting from me. I'm just doing my job in this space of maintaining the bar of accountability. You know, and so I hear what you're saying. I hear what you're doing. I hear that you're getting that narrative, and that these narratives can live in the same space from different places, because perspectives are a thing, you know. But you know, I wouldn't have had you on Facebook if I didn't want to be in your space, right? You know, if I had some horrible vendetta against you. That's not where I am. I want to increase the dialogue, which is why I'm here tonight.
And there's a couple of things going on. I just want to be mindful of time. It's about 8 o'clock. We have a couple more agenda items. So, and I'll say a couple of things about this, and then maybe we can move on. This topic has definitely come up in this setting a couple of different times, and we'll hopefully continue to have it as an agenda item. I think the Attorney General's panel is continuing. I resigned as chair, but I do know that it's continuing, and so that's addressing racial disparities in the criminal justice system. And there was something else that I was thinking of, too. I mean, I think that it makes sense for us to continue to have some community forums. People can attend the Fair and Impartial Policing Committee thing. It happens, like, what is it? Is it a couple times a year? Every quarter. Right.
There are subcommittee meetings periodically.
Right. So it's important for people to, you know, help, and even for us to get people plugged into stuff like that. But so it's kind of like, you know, the conversation and the work continues. Were you going to say something else, Wanda?
No.
Okay. But thank you both, really. Thank you, everyone, really, for having this conversation. And I think we just have to continue to have it. So, yeah, should we move on? Glad to see you're smiling, Chief.
No,
I don't know what you're smiling
No, it's a
about.
great. I mean, it's just the American project happening
Right.
before our eyes, right?
So where are we now?
Commissioners updates, I think.
Right. So I have been doing a little bit of recruiting. I believe Randall is checking us out tonight to consider maybe applying to be on the commission. I don't know if anybody else is in place, but I would like to nominate Shireen to take my place as chair.
I think we can.
I just want to put that out there because
So,
my,
but you
my,
have-
my term is over next month in June. It will have been 3 years. Yeah, it was. It's been
Yeah.
lots of fun.
So what, maybe we can have that discussion in June.
Okay.
As a group, but I really appreciate that. I'm still digesting that you're not renewing.
Okay.
I'll second it.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
I am disappointed that you're not going to be re-upping. And that's notwithstanding who might be your successor. That's disappointing, so.
Thank you.
I thought
Sorry,
maybe
thank
today
you.
would sway you and that, and that maybe this dialogue would inspire, but I understand.
Well, yeah, I
needing
mean,
to-
it does, and I mean, I definitely, I'm still in the community, I'm still gonna be involved in a lot of stuff, and will, you know, likely even show up as a community member, but that's what my thoughts are, and you and I can talk about it more. I don't know if there are other comments or anything, other commissioners on this agenda item. So what's next then? The consent agenda? Just to,
Update on the dog hearing.
oh, right.
So the order has been signed, it's been delivered to Chief Wright, who, once it gets delivered to the parties, it will become, bless you.
Excuse me, thank
It will
you.
become public. So that'll be in the next several days that it will get delivered and published.
Thank you so much, both of you. It was a long one. Jeez.
And then the annual police report. I am happy to take that on again this year. What I would think is that we would wait for June to finish, because we need the data through June 30th, and then collect the data. If the chiefs think we can do it, get the data and have a draft for the July meeting, I would think. Chief Wright, do you think that's doable?
I'm sorry, what was that?
So June 30th, between June 30th and the July meeting, being able to get the data we need to put together the annual report. Is that too optimistic, or do you think that's a?
No, I think that's doable.
Okay, so that will be my goal then, is we'll get the data, we'll wait until the year finishes out, the calendar year for the police department.
The only thing that I was gonna add, I think we were going to get copies of the complaints, and actually review
next
them and meet
batch.
with Chief
Yeah.
Wright, yeah. So I think we still need to get those.
The next batch, right?
Yeah, the next batch, yeah.
So the minutes of the previous meeting, does anybody, maybe we'll just take a few minutes to look at them.
So I move to accept?
Okay.
I'll second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay, good. Our next meeting will it just be the regular time?
I have June 26th is the next meeting. And we have an update, follow up on the 2017-2018 annual report, just check in on that.
Yep.
And then a tour of the ERV,
Great.
and anything else if you want
So
to
we
add.
had talked about Jarlath Dunn with the drone. Chief, did you still want to have him come in June?
Yeah, that's, between that and the ERV, it would be like a real
Right.
hands-on police commission
Right.
night, but that'd be good.
So should we add that?
I'll
in there?
check in. I've mentioned several times he wasn't able to come to the barbecue, but he did have someone come and do a demo, which of course the kids loved.
Yeah, good. We
But
love it just as much.
Yeah,
I
so-
can ask again if he could
If he
join
could
us
come.
for the.
Okay, that'd be great. And I'm always a day late and a dollar short, so I have to go back to commissioners' updates and comments. And I've already forgotten, this is it, I've already forgotten from 1 second ago what I was just gonna add. Just give me a minute and I'll just interrupt us again and with something completely, a non sequitur.
Something that you think needs to be on the agenda?
No,
Oh.
it was like some comment, something.
I know, we covered a lot of ground,
Welcome to my brain.
The
Well, while you're
the
thinking
search?
about it, I had a question. So, as it was noted earlier, we have this June date to report to the city council. And our next meeting is June 26th. So I guess, just again, looking for the commission to maybe decide how and when we're gonna do this. Do we wanna talk about it on the 26th, and then if it goes into July or whatever, go to the July meeting of the council, or just getting some thoughts
I
as
think,
to?
I think we have to at this point, right? Because we need to discuss. Do you think we have an option?
Well, I think we have to report something, so I guess if we make time next meeting, I think I told you I'm gonna have Laura send something around, and I encourage everybody to look online themselves. I mean, there's a lot about oversight, and, so I guess at the next meeting, we will come up with our plan to report to the council. Okay. Chase.
I mean, there's oversight and then there's civilian oversight. It's definitely two different things. But anyway, let's not get back into
Right.
that. Okay, so do we need an executive session?
I know we talked about something last time, that's been brought to the attention of folks at the state, and I don't have anything new except that that's moving along. Sorry to be, so no. I'm just trying to, I want to connect with some folks in the audience and not have to ask them
I
to.
did want to.
Yeah. Okay, good. Thank you. Thank you, Major Jonas, for being here. Thank you
thank
all.
you.
Thank you for your service, everybody, and community members.
I didn't want to go into executive session
Did
and
you
everybody
motion,
leave.
do we need a motion?
Yeah, motion to adjourn.
Oh, sorry.
Okay.
Move to adjourn.
I second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Yeah.